Here are 50 most commonly asked interview questions, along with detailed answers, for Azure Functions, which should be very useful for anyone preparing for a role involving this technology. 1. What are Azure Functions? Answer. Azure Functions is a serverless compute service that lets you run event-triggered code without having to explicitly provision or manage infrastructure. It supports multiple programming languages, including C#, JavaScript, F#, and Python. Azure Functions is ideal for building microservices, processing data, integrating systems, and working with Internet of Things IoT. 2. How do Azure Functions scale? Answer. Azure Functions scale automatically based on demand. The platform handles the scaling transparently, adding additional resources to handle increased load and scaling down when demand decreases. The scaling is based on the number of events that need to be processed by your functions. 3. What triggers can be used in Azure Functions? Answer. Azure Functions can respond to a variety of triggers, including A. HTTP requests. B. Timer triggers scheduled tasks. C. Azure Service Bus messages. D. Azure Queue storage messages. E. Azure Event Hub events. F. Cosmos DB document changes. G. Blob storage events. Each trigger type corresponds to a specific type of event that your function will respond to. 4. What is a binding in Azure Functions? Answer. In Azure Functions, bindings provide a declarative way to connect other Azure services and external resources to your function. Bindings can be input, output, or both, and they are used to pass data into and out of functions without needing to write complex integration code. 5. How does Azure Functions handle dependencies? Answer. Azure Functions supports NuGet and NPM packages, allowing you to define dependencies using a project JSON file for net functions or a package JSON file for JavaScript functions. These dependencies are installed automatically when the function is deployed or run. 6. Explain the difference between a consumption plan and an app service plan for Azure Functions. Answer. Consumption plan. This is the default hosting model for Azure Functions, which automatically allocates and scales compute power based on the number of incoming event triggers. You only pay for the compute resources you use. App Service Plan. This model uses dedicated resources for your functions, similar to web apps hosted on Azure App Services. It offers more predictable performance and the ability to scale based on standard app service scaling rules. 7. What are durable functions? Answer. Durable functions is an extension of Azure Functions that allows you to write stateful functions in a serverless compute environment. This extension enables complex orchestration of functions and allows functions to call other functions, await results, and retry failed operations. 8. How can you secure an Azure function? Answer. Azure Functions can be secured using A. Function keys, which provide an API key-level authentication. B. Integration with Azure Active Directory for OAuth-based security. C. IP restrictions to limit access to functions from specified IP addresses. D. CORS settings to manage cross-origin resource sharing. 9. What are the best practices for logging in Azure Functions? Answer. Azure Functions integrates with Azure Monitor and Application Insights for monitoring and logging. Best practices include A. Using built-in logging features, such as iLogger in net functions. B. Setting appropriate log levels, for example, info, warning, error based on the severity of the information. C. Including custom telemetry to track the performance and usage of your functions. 10. What is the role of Azure Function Proxies? Answer. Azure Function Proxies provide a way to define a single API surface from multiple functions, allowing you to create a more streamlined client experience. It can route requests to various functions or outside URLs, acting as a reverse proxy and facilitating a microservices architecture. 11. How do you manage state in Azure Functions? Answer. Managing state in a stateless service, like Azure Functions, can be achieved by using A. Azure Blob Storage for large states. B. Azure Table Storage or Cosmos DB for structured data. C. Durable Functions for stateful orchestrations. 12. What is the maximum execution timeout for an Azure function? Answer. Owner consumption plan. The maximum execution timeout is 5 minutes, which can be extended up to 10 minutes. On a premium or dedicated app service plan, the timeout can be set to unbounded, which allows for indefinitely long processing times. 13. How can you handle exceptions in Azure Functions? Answer. Exception handling in Azure Functions can be done by A. Using try, catch blocks within the function code to handle exceptions locally. B. Configuring dead letter options for bindings that support it, like Azure Queue Storage, to handle failed message processing. C. Integrating with application insights to monitor and alert on exceptions. 14. Can Azure Functions be deployed in a virtual network? Answer. Yes. Azure Functions hosted on a premium or dedicated app service plan can be integrated into a virtual network, providing enhanced security and isolation by allowing access to resources within the virtual network. 15. Explain the cold start problem in Azure Functions. How can it be mitigated? Answer. A cold start refers to the latency added when an Azure function is invoked for the first time after being idle. This can be mitigated by A. Choosing an app service plan which keeps the function app always loaded. B. Using precompiled functions in .NET. C. Optimizing your functions code and dependencies to reduce startup time. 16. What are the programming models available in Azure Functions? Answer. Azure Functions supports the programming models. A. Imperative. In this model, you write code that explicitly defines what happens when a function is triggered. B. Declarative. In this model, configuration and bindings are used to declaratively define how data flows to and from your functions. 17. What is the difference between Azure Functions and Azure Logic Apps? Answer. While both Azure Functions and Azure Logic Apps provide integration and process automation capabilities, Azure Functions is code-centric, suitable for developers who want control over the runtime and dependencies. Azure Logic Apps is configuration-centric, suitable for scenarios where rapid integration with various SaaS applications is required without much code. 18. How do you version Azure Functions? Answer. Versioning an Azure Functions can be handled by A. Structuring function app folders to include version numbers. B. Deploying different versions as separate functions within the same function app. C. Using proxies to route requests to different function versions based on the URL or headers. 19. Can you use Entity Framework within Azure Functions? Answer. Yes. You can use Entity Framework within Azure Functions, particularly in functions running on an app service plan. This allows for ORM-based data access patterns, commonly used in .NET development. However, care must be taken to manage database connections and performance in a serverless environment. 20. How do you monitor and debug Azure Functions? Answer. Monitoring and debugging can be accomplished using A. Azure Monitor and Application Insights for real-time performance monitoring and logging. B. Development tools, such as the Azure Functions Core Tools and Visual Studio for local debugging. C. Live Metrics and Snapshot Debugger in Application Insights for live site debugging and performance monitoring. 21. What file types are associated with Azure Functions? Answer. Typical file types include A. CSX files for C# script-based functions. B. JS files for JavaScript functions. C. Function JSON for function configuration. D. Host JSON and local settings JSON for a host and local configuration settings. 22. How does Azure Functions support mobile backends? Answer. Azure Functions can act as a mobile backend by A. Providing HTTP-based APIs that can be consumed by mobile apps. B. Integrating with Azure mobile apps to leverage features like offline sync. C. Using triggers and bindings to interact with other services like storage and databases useful for mobile app data. 25. What is the role of host JSON in Azure Functions? Answer. The host JSON file contains global configuration settings that affect all functions within an Azure Functions app. Settings include logging levels, function timeouts, and concurrency configurations. 26. How can Azure Functions connect to on-premises resources? Answer. Azure Functions can connect to on-premises resources using A. Azure Relay, which allows securely exposing on-premises services to the cloud. B. Hybrid connections in Azure App Service, which provides an easy and secure way to connect on-premises web servers to Azure. 27. Discuss the pricing model of Azure Functions. Answer. Azure Functions pricing depends on the plan. A. Consumption plan. You pay only for the time your code runs, measured in gigabyte seconds of resource consumption. B. Premium plan. Offers more powerful instances, longer run durations, and no cold starts. C. Dedicated app service plan. You pay for underlying app service instances, suitable for running continuous or long-running functions. 28. What is the significance of local settings JSON? Answer. Local settings JSON store app settings and connection strings used during local development. These settings are not checked into source control, ensuring sensitive information is kept private. 29. Can Azure Functions be used for data processing? Answer. Yes. Azure Functions is ideal for data processing tasks, such as image or media processing, file manipulation, or event stream processing, particularly when using bindings for services like Azure Blob Storage or Event Hubs. 30. How can you automate deployment of Azure Functions? Answer. Automated deployment can be achieved using A. Azure DevOps services for continuous integration and delivery. B. GitHub Actions for deploying functions directly from a GitHub repository. C. ARM templates or Terraform scripts for infrastructure as code deployments. 31. What are the benefits of using Azure Functions for IoT solutions? Answer. Azure Functions is well suited for IoT applications due to its event-driven nature and seamless integration with other Azure services. Benefits include A. Scalability. Automatically scales to handle millions of IoT device messages. B. Integration. Works with IoT Hub for event ingestion and Stream Analytics for real-time data processing. C. Serverless. Reduces the complexity of infrastructure management, allowing developers to focus on application logic. 32. How do you handle configuration settings in Azure Functions? Answer. Configuration settings in Azure Functions are managed through A. Application settings in the Azure portal for storing environment variables that can be accessed programmatically in your functions. B. Local settings JSON for local development. Stores settings used only during development. These need to be manually added to application settings in the Azure portal or through CI/CD pipelines for production environments. 33. What is the difference between continuous and triggered bindings in Azure Functions? Answer. Continuous bindings are those that cause the function to execute continuously or on a predefined schedule. Examples include timer triggers. Triggered bindings activate a function in response to an external event, such as receiving a message on a queue or an HTTP request. 34. Can you explain how to use Azure Functions with a database? Answer. Azure Functions can interact with databases using bindings or traditional database access techniques. A. Input and output bindings. For example, Cosmos DB bindings allow functions to interact directly with data without needing additional code. B. Traditional database access using data access libraries like Entity Framework or VNET in function code to perform more complex queries or transactions. 35. What are some common patterns used with Azure Functions? Answer. Common design patterns include A. Event-driven architecture. Functions are triggered by events, making them ideal for integrating different systems. B. Aggregator pattern. Functions can aggregate data from various sources, process it, and store the results in a central location. C. Fan-out or fan-in pattern. Useful for scenarios where multiple operations need to be performed in parallel and then consolidated, supported by durable functions. 36. How can you optimize the performance of Azure Functions? Answer. Performance optimization techniques include A. Avoiding cold starts by using premium plans. B. Keeping function execution short and efficient. C. Minimizing dependencies in your functions. D. Using async programming patterns to improve throughput. 37. How does Azure Functions integrate with other Azure services? Answer. Azure Functions has built-in support for integrating with a range of Azure services, such as A. Azure Event Grid for event routing. B. Azure Logic Apps for workflow orchestration. C. Azure Storage for data storage. D. Azure Event Hubs for big data streaming. These integrations are facilitated through bindings, making it easier to connect and interact with these services. 38. Discuss the security features available in Azure Functions. Answer. Security features in Azure Functions include A. Authentication and authorization with Azure Active Directory. B. Function keys for simple API key-based access control. C. Managed identities for secure Azure service-to-service authentication. D. Network isolation using virtual network integration. 39. What are the limitations of Azure Functions? Answer. Limitations singled. A. Timeouts. Maximum execution timeout varies by plan, which can be a limitation for long-running processes. B. Cold starts, especially in consumption plans, where functions may have a delay when scaling from 0. C. State management, being primarily stateless, managing state across executions, can be challenging without using durable functions or external storage. 40. How do you test Azure Functions locally? Answer. Local testing can be facilitated by A. Azure Functions Core Tools allows you to run a functions host on your local development machine. B. Local settings file local settings JSON manages app settings and connection strings during development. C. Integrated development environment sites. Tools like Visual Studio and VS Code offer integrated debugging and testing for Azure Functions. 41. What types of triggers and bindings are available in Azure Functions? Answer. Azure Functions supports a variety of triggers and bindings that facilitate interactions with other services. Common triggers include A. Trigger. Triggers the function through an HTTP request. B. Timer trigger. Executes the function on a specified schedule. C. Queue trigger. Responds to messages arriving in an Azure queue storage. D. Blob trigger. Reacts to changes in Azure blob storage. E. Event trigger. Processes events from Azure Event Hubs. F. Service bus trigger. Handles messages from Azure Service Bus. Bindings provide a way to declaratively connect other services to the function, either as input or output, such as A. Blob. read from or write to blob storage. B. Queue, send messages to queue storage. C. Table, interact with Azure Table Storage. D. Cosmist, connect to Azure Cosmos DB. E. Signaler, send messages to clients using Azure Signaler Service. 42. How do you manage dependencies in Azure Functions? Answer. Managing dependencies in Azure Functions can be done through A. NuGet packages for C# functions by specifying package references in the function project file * C sproj. B. NPM packages for JavaScript functions by using a package JSON file to define dependencies. C. Extensions JSON for binding extensions, which may require additional libraries. It's important to keep dependencies minimal to reduce the function's cold start time and overall execution latency. 43. Explain the concept of durable functions and its use cases. Answer. Durable functions is an extension of Azure Functions that enables stateful and orchestration capabilities in serverless environments. It allows you to write complex, stateful functions in a serverless compute environment. Common use cases include A. Chaining functions, where the output of one function becomes the input of another. B. Fan-out, fan-in scenarios, where multiple functions execute in parallel, and then wait for all to complete. C. Asynchronous human interaction patterns, such as approval workflows, where a function waits for a human action. D. Aggregation from multiple sources, to process results from multiple functions into a single result. 44. How can you monitor and troubleshoot Azure Functions? Answer. Monitoring and troubleshooting are critical for maintaining the reliability and performance of Azure Functions. Tools and practices include A. Azure Monitor and Application Insights provides comprehensive monitoring capabilities, including automated detection of performance anomalies and detailed logging. B. LiveMetrics offers real-time performance monitoring. C. Log streaming helps view logs in real time directly from the Azure portal or via Azure CLI. D. Snapshot Debugger allows you to inspect the state of live applications without affecting their performance. 45. What strategies can you use for handling errors and exceptions in Azure Functions? Answer. Error handling in Azure Functions should be proactive and robust, using strategies such as A. Try-catch blocks to manage exceptions within the function code. B. Dead letter queues for messages that cannot be processed after several attempts. C. Retry policies, configurable directly in the function bindings or programmatically to handle transient faults. D. Logging errors to application insights for post-mortem analysis. 46. Discuss how you would secure an HTTP triggered Azure function. Answer. Securing triggered functions involves multiple approaches. A. Authentication. Implement authentication mechanisms using Azure Active Directory or third-party OAuth providers. B. Authorization. Ensure that only authorized users can access the function, potentially using function keys or integration with Azure API management for fine-grained access control. C. HTTPS. Enforce HTTPS to secure data in transit. D. Input validation. Prevent injection attacks by validating input data. 47. How can Azure Functions be integrated into DevOps practices? Answer. Azure Functions fits well into DevOps practices by supporting A. Continuous integration, continuous deployment CI/CD, using Azure DevOps, GitHub Actions, or other CI/CD tools to automate deployments and testing. B. Infrastructure as code IAC, using ARM templates or Terraform to provision required Azure resources. C. Monitoring and feedback loops, utilizing application insights and Azure Monitor for insights into performance and usage patterns, feeding back into the development process. 48. What is the purpose of scaling in Azure Functions, and how is it managed? Answer: Scaling. Azure Functions is designed to meet changes in demand automatically. The Azure Functions host automatically scales event-driven functions in response to load, and is managed by a. Consumption plan, automatically adds compute resources based on the number of events its functions are triggered by. B. Premium plan, provides pre-warmed instances to handle spikes in load without delay. C. Dedicated plan, runs on dedicated infrastructure, providing predictable performance suitable for long-running operations. 49. Can Azure Functions be developed in containers? Answer: yes. Azure Functions can be developed and deployed in containers. This allows them to run in container environments, such as Kubernetes, providing flexibility and control over the hosting environment and configuration. 50. What is the role of Azure Functions proxies? Answer: Azure Functions proxies provide a way to define a single unified API surface from multiple functions, allowing developers to route requests to different function apps or external services. This simplifies the client-side experience by providing a consistent API gateway-like feature directly within Azure Functions. The above 50 questions and answers provide a comprehensive overview of Azure Functions, covering key aspects such as triggers, bindings, performance optimization, security, and integration with other Azure services. They delve into the practical implementation, monitoring, and maintenance of Azure Functions, addressing both basic concepts and advanced scenarios. This set of Q&A is designed to equip candidates with the knowledge required to effectively utilize Azure Functions in a variety of real-world applications, ensuring they are well prepared for technical interviews related to serverless computing on the Azure platform. For more exciting tips, tricks, and more importantly for valuable insights of interviews, please share, like, and subscribe to my channel. It has a lot of valuable information about various insights of interviews. It has a wide range of real-world portfolio projects of various technologies for interviews, and it has wide range of most asked interview questions and answers of various technologies like data science, SAP, AWS, DevOps, and full-stack web development, and more that will be useful during interviews. It has a wide range of most asked interview questions and answers and real-world portfolio projects of various technologies for freshers, 2 to 3 years experience candidates, and 5 or above years experience candidates to test their skills by knowing most asked interview questions and make themselves ready for interviews.